Hey, before we get started, be sure to subscribe to us on tinyletter.com/significantbrothers so you can keep up with all of our significant happenings. Now, on with the show.
So, welcome to Significant Brothers. I'm Brad,
I'm Chase.
And I'm Cray.
and today we are talking about fan fiction. We've all consumed fan fiction in some way or another, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
Like, okay, what would you consider fan fiction?
Works that somebody has done that's like in addition to copyrighted material that someone else has done.
That's one definition of it. Let me give you 5 other ones.
No, they don't. I guess they don't have to be copyrighted.
No, they don't, but because okay, so there's one view of fan fiction that's like it's the work of amateurs retelling a story. And I first heard that I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. For example, the most famous one ever is the Bible, and I was like, okay, because it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yeah, they're all retelling the same story, and none of them are professional writers. And I was like, okay. Then I just feel like that definition of fan fiction is very loose. So by that loose definition, sure, the Gospels could be considered fan fiction. More better one is the reworking of another author's characters, and in this case, fan fiction really couldn't exist until people could lay claim to their own characters, or really until copyright became a real thing, and that was in the 17th century, I believe.
Okay. So kind of like making up stuff about characters, like, oh, they actually like this person, or they're really into playing tennis on the weekends. That type
Yeah,
of deal.
and it became a lot more popular once, like, the printing press came out and people could make works more, and there was actual, like, time of mourning between works being released, because you weren't expecting it to be 20 years for a book to be mass-produced. Like, it could be 5 years, and people had to wait for the next one. So, like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to supplement my own story into this to entertain myself and others. But people really couldn't own their characters until copywriting became a thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's several different kinds. I knew there was a lot of fan fiction out there, and then I started researching, and I was almost disgusted with how much fan fiction there is.
What was one of the most bizarre ones you saw?
When I was looking more into the different types of fan fiction over a brief history of everything, there wasn't anything that necessarily surprised me, because when you're going to this, you kind of have to understand that the human mind is incredibly complex. They can come up with almost anything. And I would have been more surprised if I would have found a fan fiction about Bella and Jacob in Twilight, and they were just living a normal life together, and neither one of them were vampires. That would have surprised me a lot, and I'm sure that might be out there. But of course, we all know that 50 Shades of Grey was a fan fiction of Twilight.
What?
Did you not know that?
It was of Twilight?
Yeah, it's a Twilight fan fiction. That's what it was based off of.
Really?
Yeah.
Are there vampires in there?
No.
Werewolves?
No, there's just a lot of BDSM.
Kristen Stewart?
Jacob Marley?
Jacob Marley.
What's the guy's name?
Henderson?
Is that him?
I don't know.
The
I think
Hufflepuff
that
guy?
sounds familiar. I thought it was based on a popular work, but I guess after it being retouched so much that it had really nothing to do with the original image it was trying to portray.
I don't know. I haven't read it or seen the movie for either. Okay, I did see one Twilight movie one time, but
Oh.
I didn't watch 50 Shades of Grey or read it. I don't know. And the book has received a lot of outcry against, both from the conservative group and people who actually do participate in BDSM. And so when the book came out, there was a lot of like, oh, there's people making fictional works of other people's work overtaking the actual good writing that goes into stuff. But no, this has been going on for a long time. Yeah, Jane Austen really liked it. There were some the Mary Sue style of self-insert fan fiction became popular with Sir Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, because it would take a bit for his stories to come out, and so people would insert themselves meeting Sherlock, or in the style would be any one of their heroes in the books, and they themselves would be perfect people, and they would help Sherlock solve his crimes.
Okay, so that's something you'd like probably share with your family or something, saying like, look at this little story I wrote where Sherlock and I catch the burglar.
Yeah, it was developed mostly in there were some literary groups that loved Sherlock and New York and London, and they would talk theories or debate each other on what this means in what story, and they would share their fan fictions with each other.
That sounds nice.
And then there was slash fic, which I didn't know anything about. And then when I had talked to some of my friends that used to read fan fiction, they knew all about this. But okay,
What?
so going off of slash fic, what do you think it is?
I think it's erotic in nature.
I think it's. Is it? I want to say sword duels and they slash each other, or is it a certain 1980s hair metal band guitarist style fan fiction?
That would almost be better.
Really?
I would love that one. But no, it is. This became popular in the 1950s when TV came out and connected global audiences together. And it's often pairing two characters on a TV show together, both same sex and gay relationships. The first published one.
Oh, wait. Is this a 1950s sitcom characters?
Nope, it is 1950s, and it is Star Trek. So this came out in 1968. It is called The Ring of Sojourn, and Spock goes into the state of Pon farr. And basically it's when the Vulcans, and I don't know if this is actually how Vulcans work. I don't know a lot about Star Trek, but they almost enter a heat-like state of mind where they need to have sex or they're going to die. It shows just Kirk and Spock on this planet together, and in order to save Spock's life, they become lovers. And then they spend the rest of their days exploring the planet and each other's bodies.
Oh no.
Wow.
So, okay, the reason why it's called slash fic is because the way it is written out, it'd be like Spock slash Kurt, John slash Watson. So it's the slash fic.
So they published that into
This
a
was
book?
published. It was a 108-page book.
That's disturbing. Not disturbing in a way that I hadn't imagined those characters having interest in each other. That was more of a Sulu sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and it's almost kind of sweet because obviously neither of the characters are gay, but Kurt decided to take it upon himself to save his best friend, and then they both ended up falling in love. It's kind of sweet, isn't it? And then there's a lot more fan fiction out there that I don't really feel like I need to go into. Like there's
As you're about to
well,
go
I'm not
into-
gonna like talk about in depth like slash
Please.
fic. But there's like, this crossover is fan fiction, and then of course I don't know if you've seen it, Chase, but a Harry Potter musical. That would be considered fan fiction.
That is a fan fiction, yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's fantastic. I love that so
It's so
much.
good.
So would you call Wicked? That's a fan fiction kind of. That's like a retelling of the story.
Yeah, I guess that could be considered fan fiction.
Huh. I'm way more into fan fiction than I thought I was.
Have you read Wicked?
No, I saw it.
Okay. It's a very thick book.
Well, is it fan fiction? I mean, it's a prequel, isn't it? Wicked. It's a prequel, so it doesn't necessarily change the canon of the next movie.
It
So
does though, because it kind of it starts as a prequel, but then it goes at the same time, but from another person's perspective during the Wizard of Oz. So it like goes from like Elphaba, the witch.
But the events are the same.
Yeah.
The events are the same, but it's like giving background to why the events happened from someone else's perspective.
And if we go by the first definition of fan fiction that I read earlier, it's the retelling of a story.
Yeah, I know. I just feel like there has to be at some point where, like, if Lucasfilm / Disney published, like, a movie about A New Hope, but from the perspective of an Imperial soldier, then would that be considered fan fiction? I don't think it would.
Yeah, but
No,
they
because
already
they
own all
did
the
it.
characters.
Right, but I'm saying, like, what if,
Like if I made
if you,
that.
well, if someone, you, like, paid a royalty fee and they're like, yeah, you can publish this and this can be canon, is it fan fiction then?
No.
I guess I don't.
I don't know if that was the case with Wicked, obviously, but
Well, I don't know if it's like canon. I don't know that whole universe, but like I think it was because I think they either got permission or the copyright was done because that's an old book. So it was just someone wrote that. You know, the original was written in Holland. Wizard of Oz.
Holland, Michigan. We're from Holland, Michigan.
Fun fact.
that's just a brief history of the craziness that is the world of fan fiction.
Okay. So I like your definitions of fan fiction, and I think they're accurate, and I think we all got a good grasp of what they are. But I think to push it in an even further direction, what I think fan fiction is stories being told that are a take on the reality that we see and are put down as like some sort of fictional story.
So fiction?
Fiction inspired by true events. Are they happening? Is this real? I don't know.
So like
Let's find out.
historical fiction.
Like historical fiction.
But
that's
now.
that's the word. Yes, maybe current fiction. The fan fiction that I'm going to be discussing with you guys is El Ignacio Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, or The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha, or The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of the Mancha. So, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Don Quixote. Are you?
Yes.
I've heard of it before, but I did not know this was a potential fan fiction.
So, a lot of this stuff, according to Cervantes, is based on the archives of La Mancha, which is where Don Quixote is from. And so he has taken it and is in a way convincing the readers that Don Quixote was a real person that he found in these archives and has like a foot or two out of reality. And he's taken like from multiple different sources, mostly from the archives, but also from other tales about Don Quixote being like an actual guy that existed and was like a hero, but also a guy who's trying to bring back chivalry. That's what he's trying to do. So one of the times in the story that we see some sort of break from reality. So, and if these sources are real, then it's historical fiction. If they're not real, then it's a fan fiction because he's taking stuff from a guy already named Don Quixote. Someone else's
Because
story.
he's writing a story based on archives that are real, but don't mention Don Quixote at all.
Yes,
It's a
but
fan fiction of archives.
yes. I'm going to do a yes, but, and then we'll be to be continued because there's something we're going to uncover. So
Okay,
I'm
take us
excited.
on this journey.
we see this sort of break in reality. There's a scene when Don Quixote is traveling down the road and he sees a woman who's in a carriage with a man, and he decides he needs to rescue this woman from this man. And he's a Biscayan man, a man from the Basque country, because this takes place in Spain.
Oh, okay.
So he decides he needs to do it, and they get into a sword fight. And in the middle of the sword fight, towards the end of the chapter, Cervantes writes, and I don't know where the story goes from here. He's like, I don't know. My records don't show anything. He's like, I don't know what happens. I don't know. And it ends. The chapter ends right there. The book continues, but the chapter ends in the middle of the sword fight because he doesn't know where it goes.
Tricky.
Yeah. A little bit weird too, because it's like, so, but like, are you the author of this book? Like, could you just write this in? You may have written some other stuff that might not be true in there.
So he's really trying to put this fictional character into this world and make him sound real.
Yeah, and the thing is, people ate this up, like this sort of like meta thing. People thought was hilarious. Him breaking it, this story, being like, "Wow!" Like just in the middle of the story, being like, "I don't know what happens. I don't know." But in the next chapter, Cervantes goes and he talks about how he went to a marketplace. He was just walking around a marketplace in Toledo, Spain, and he was saying how he saw a child selling pamphlets, and he's like, "I love pamphlets. I just like reading them." And he picks it up, and it's the story of Don Quixote fighting the Biscayan man, and it picks up where it left off. And then he says like, well, he's like, I brought the kid back to my place because it was in Arabic, so I had him translate. And he kind of does a little sort of, people were racist back then, so he's like, it was an Arab person, so they can't be trusted, but this is what he said. And then he like goes and continues with the story of the sword fight, and it's like he could have just put that in there, like continued from the last chapter and been like, he met the Biscayan man and just finished it, but he had to break off, say, I don't know where this goes. By the way, the next day I went to the market because I needed some milk and I saw these pamphlets.
I kind of really want to read this book now.
Yeah, and so it was like a weird, it's weird like that. So he released the book in, I want to say it was like 16, it's the early 1600s, the time doesn't matter, and it was really popular. It got translated into a bunch of different languages within 4 years. It made its way to the New World. It was widely popular. There was a gap of 10 years, and he released a part two. But in the gap, when he released part one and part two, someone else wrote a story about Don Quixote.
Huh.
And it was kind of took a different take on Don Quixote, but he was like, well, if the story is not told, I'm just going to write my own, because he didn't have a way of knowing that Cervantes was going to read it, and it was by a guy named Alonso Fernandez.
So what did he write?
It was just a continuation. People don't really hold it in high regard, but it was just like sort of a random tale, and so he added some new characters in there, and he was like trying to poke fun at it, sort of, but like also like take a like in the way that you would with fan fiction. I don't know how seriously he took it, but Cervantes didn't really like it, and so in the part two that Cervantes wrote, it first starts off with Don Quixote, his friend Sancho, who he travels in the book with, is saying, did you hear? Part one was a bestseller. He's like, we're famous now. People know our names. And he's like talking about how well the book did, how well part one did in the middle. Because now when you buy it, it's just part one and part two put together. So he's saying, look how great we are. We're famous. People know our names.
Oh my gosh.
So it's even more meta than it had been before, because they already have like contact with the real world, but they're not real, not really, but they kind of are, because Don Quixote may have existed, but not this one that's on paper. So
No, yeah, because there's no way he would have known a part one was successful.
right. Yeah, because like in his world it's not. But here's the thing. In this world now, there are two Don Quixotes that exist. So there's this character that Alonso Fernandez made. His name was Don Alonso Tarfe. And he's at an inn. And he's like sees... Don Quixote goes up to Alonso, who's at the bar, and he's just like, look at me, I'm Don Quixote. He said, oh, I met you before. I met you in this one book that was written a few years ago. And then Don Quixote was like, no, that's not me. That is not me. And so I can read you some of the exchange. Sancho says to him, and the real Don Quixote of La Mancha, the famous, the valiant, the wise, the lover, the righter of wrongs, the guardian of minors and orphans, the protector of widows, the killer of damsels, he who has for his sole mistress the peerless Dulcinea de Tabasco, is the gentleman before you, my master. All other Don Quixotes and all other Sancho Panzas are dreams and mockeries.
Oh.
So he's like taking a stab at the book that was written. And then the new character, Don Alvaro, he said, he was more greedy than the well-spoken and more dull than the droll. I am convinced the enchanters who persecute Don Quixote the good, who have been trying to persecute me with Don Quixote the bad. And then Don Quixote says, I entreat your worship by your endeavor as a gentleman to be so good as to make a declaration before the alcalde of this village that you never in your life saw me until now, and that neither am I the Don Quixote in print in the second part, nor this Sancho Panza, my squire, the one your worship knew. And then he makes the character sign an affidavit saying that the other one didn't exist in his book.
That's the best fan fiction ever.
Yes. And
It's
so,
like one trying to establish itself as a new canon.
yeah, and then he like takes it and he's just like, no, that's not true. Whatever was written, because this was before copyright existed. So This is how you handle someone trying to make your work their own, is you write about it and how bad it was.
Oh my gosh.
So, Don Quixote. Fan fiction?
I researched the vast universe of Star Wars.
Yes.
So, on April 25, 2014, I would say the biggest influx of fan fiction in all of fan fiction history was created.
This is a really interesting take on this.
Yeah, when Lucasfilm, in partnership with Disney, announced that they're rewriting the Star Wars canon. Now, of course, they kept the trilogies, the original and the prequel, the same, as well as, I think it was Star Wars The Clone Wars TV series.
Mm-hmm.
Though they kept that as the canon, but all the other books from the expanded universe basically being many people basically paying royalties to Lucasfilm and then publishing their book in the Star Wars universe. That was considered no longer canon at all. Now, any questions?
I just want to say that's just mind blowing. I hadn't even considered that would be fan fiction. These novels and like comic books that people held so dear for so long as actual stories.
Were they ever confirmed canon, or were they just like, he didn't say, this might be?
Well, yeah, see, I was struggling with, like, the line between canon and fan fiction and all that before April 25, 2014. They did have a hierarchy of what is legitimate in the expanded universe, what Lucasfilm could build off of, and what they hold in high regard, and other categories of stuff, which I think would fall more into fan fiction. So, in the expanded universe, which is outside of the trilogies, the continuity canon is major works that are considered the most legitimate and that fit into some sort of storyline. The second form of the hierarchy doesn't have a certain continuity, but it's not completely outrageous. And then they had non-canon, which is what-if stories, stuff that's contradicted by higher forms of the canon. And it was the only level that Lucasfilm didn't consider to have any level of canonicity.
So that's probably fan fiction.
Yeah, that I would say is fan fiction. I got all of this from Wikipedia, the internet's leading source on all things Star Wars.
It's pretty...
So I would say before 2014, there were things in the expanded universe that, while George Lucas himself didn't say they were necessarily true, they could still be considered canon of some sort, and I would argue that that was not fan fiction. They got it published by Lucasfilm, they paid their royalties, some hardworking authors, I imagine, collaborating and saying, like, what makes sense in this timeline. And then 2014 happens, and all of a sudden, it all becomes fan fiction because it's no longer canon. It doesn't exist in this new universe.
Were people upset?
I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
My roommate was livid.
Okay, that's what I was going to say, because when I talk to Star Wars fans, when I bring up, like, the 7th movie, I'm like, yeah, like, it was kind of like A New Hope, but I really enjoyed it. And they're like, yeah, like, I do like the revamping, but goodness, I'm not a fan of the whole new canon thing. Which I get, because that's a lot of a rich universe, and it sucks to think that that's not the direction that they're going to go in anymore. That's just, like, basically been relegated to what Lucasfilm calls Legends category. They call everything the expanded universe that's no longer canon as Legends.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of a burn.
I know, it is, and so they...
Falsehoods.
Yeah. They published a book, Disney, Lucasfilm, I think in 2014, called A New Dawn, and everything from A New Dawn and on is now considered canon. So anything that's published under the Lucasfilm thing from now on is considered canon.
Oh, that's such a money grab. They're probably just like, we just want the royalties.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's also just to clean it up.
True, because now they don't have to worry about, like, these 4 or 5 different tiers of, like, continuity and what do we consider legitimate and what do we not. But it does seem to make the universe a little less exciting. Like, obviously, people can still do this on forums. They could continue the expanded universe, but legally, the expanded universe can no longer be expanded. Like, no one can publish under Lucasfilm anymore, so therefore no one can elaborate on the expanded universe.
It kind of makes me dislike Disney. Like, they just came in and told people the way things are going to be. Like, they had nothing to do with that universe before, and they were like, oh, hey, nerds. And they just, like, ripped everybody's stories to pieces.
Well, it's not just Disney.
Said,
LucasArts had a say in it, too.
but they weren't, like, selective, because it sounds like they would put them in tiers. Like, so long as you're willing to pay the royalties, they were willing to, like, let your thing be published, right? Like, they would give it
Yeah.
its status like, this is crap, it's not true, but if you want our tag.
Yeah, and if the expanded universe could come up with like a fourth tier of stories that they don't really consider to be legitimate or necessarily good, it doesn't seem like Lucasfilm had a very high barrier. I think it was more of a situation like, pay me money, and sure, yeah, you can publish your book. I don't care.
That is so George Lucas. What a jerk.
What a jerk.
Yeah, it's like it's a weird combination of like, sure, maybe Lucas should have been a little more strict with what he allowed into his canon, and then Disney and the new LucasArts kind of like punished all of the fans for allowing that to happen.
Yeah, because there's a part of me that thinks it's really cool that there's a whole universe that was pretty inclusive and said, yeah, sure, like, write whatever stories you want. If you can make it fit in well enough, who knows, maybe people will take it really seriously. And just as the robber in Settlers of Catan will steal your piece of wood, so will Disney steal all your hopes and dreams.
But they will give you a new hope. Yeah, hey, thanks for listening. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Significant Bros. And you can send us emails, sigbrotherspod@gmail.com.
And you can listen and follow us on iTunes, Podbean, pretty much any other podcasting service, and on YouTube. Given the spirit of this episode, we thought it would be fun to record a fan fiction that we are all very fond of and release it as an audiobook of sorts, but we will be releasing it 2 chapters at a time. It'll be the Harry Potter universe, the Hogwarts School of Prayers and Miracles. We think it is very funny, but keep in mind, it is satire, so we hope you guys enjoy. That will be released next week, the first 2 chapters.